Hi, I'm Chris Cassidy. This is a NuSun Network, and I am here today with Maria from Martinez Echevarria, and we are going to be talking about all things real estate law and how you can buy a property in Spain. So, Maria, tell me about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I'm one of the senior lawyers at Martinez Echevarria Law firm. I belong to the real estate or conveyancing department, and what I'm doing is advising clients that are to do an investment in Spain.
So what are the first steps that someone should think about when buying a property right here in the Costa del Sol?
The first step I will recommend, of course, is getting a lawyer.
Yep.
Maybe you don't speak the language, you don't know the system, you don't know the legalities involved. So it's very important to have a professional on your side to protect your interests and your rights in this process.
So can you tell me about the documents that are needed? Obviously there's a lot of documentation you need, but what are the key things that you need document-wise to purchase a property?
Key documents, I will say, they are the land registry extract, nota simple, to know who's the owner of the property, if there is any charges on the property, any encumbrances, any prohibitions even to sell the property. And the other essential document is the first occupation license, because the first occupation license is a very important document to take into account when buying a property.
Okay.
Besides that, of course, you need to have all your economic documents prepared, because Spain has one of the strictest money laundering regulation. So it's very important to have all the economic documents that give support to the investment that you are going to make. Essentially, it's just your tax declarations, and if the money is coming from other sources, for example, the sale of a property abroad, to have the deeds that prove that you received this money.
Yeah. Okay. Maria, you mentioned about the anti-money laundering there, and that's really important. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about that, please?
Yes. Yeah. It's a process that it can be frustrating for some clients, but it's just a protocol that we have to follow for all the clients doing an investment, the clients in the real estate department, just to check what's the origin of the money, how this money was originating, because as I mentioned earlier, Spain has one of the strictest control or money laundering regulations, so we need to be sure that this money is clean.
Yes, of course.
Basically that. So it's just a matter of having all the economic documents in place to give proof of the origin of the money that is going to be invested. Basically that. We will guide the client, of course, during the process to explain what documents are needed, but it's basically tax declarations and other, in case of more complicated scenarios like sale of an asset, of money coming from the sale of shares, we will let them know exactly what documents they need to do to pass the process.
To pass the process. So you guide them through that journey.
Exactly, because it can be, in a way, can be frustrating for the client. They don't know what they need to send and how to pass the protocol. So we will, of course, guide them through it.
So Maria, I keep hearing about, for my clients, there's a bit that always comes up about community of assets and why it's really important, specifically around UK clients, maybe compared to Spanish clients, but it could be people in the US and in different countries as well. But can you help our viewers and our audience here just understand a bit more about the community of assets and what it actually means and what you need to do to prepare?
Yes, depending on where the client is from, they will have a specific matrimonial system. For example, UK clients normally have separation of assets. This means that they could make the investment if they are married, they could make the investment just by themselves, and this asset that they buy will not belong to the matrimonial or marriage assets.
Okay.
Different to Spain, for example, Spanish people or the Spanish matrimonial regime, if you haven't signed a prenup agreement, it means that if I married and I buy something during my marriage, it will belong to both of us, to my spouse. It will belong to the matrimonial assets.
Okay.
That's the main difference.
That's very different. So if you're from the UK and let's say you're married and you want to, I mean, normally, right, there'll be one or two that will have the money to buy it. It might be the husband, it might be the wife.
Yeah.
But normally it's one.
Yes.
Who are going to, they'll buy it. So, but in the UK, if they do that, it automatically goes into both their names normally. But in Spain, it's different. So I think what you're saying is that if, for example, it was the wife who had the money and bought the property,
yeah,
if they were wanting to have 50-50, put it into both of their names,
yeah,
then I think you're saying we can't really do that unless both of them have got the funds. Is that right?
Yes, they will, in order to avoid any issues with the tax authorities in this case, where we will recommend, if this case that you are presenting,
yeah,
we have an UK couple, but only one of them have the funds, but they want to put the property in both names,
yeah.
50-50. In this case, we will recommend that there is a document signed between the spouses, for example, a donation agreement or donation contract between them. So there is this money is used by one of the spouses. It has to be documented and it has to be presented to the tax authorities to avoid the tax authorities discovering later without you telling them and sending you a tax bill. That's very important.
So from a tax perspective, it's really important. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that might be a loan contract or a gift. What about a gift contract?
Exactly. I mean,
like
it depends on the agreement between the couple. Of course, there is very different situations, but both could be done. Either a loan agreement, but of course the payments have to be returned as a normal loan, or a donation. The donation, it doesn't mean that you have to return the payments. It's just a gift.
Okay, got you.
Yes.
And you would help them through that process?
Absolutely, yes, of course.
So we spoke about, community of assets, and we spoke about Spanish clients and UK clients and the differences there, but I also get a lot of clients from, the US, Sweden, Norway, Holland, but just if I pick a couple, can you tell us maybe about what community of assets means for, I don't know, the US and Sweden, for example?
Well, Swedish citizens have a very special system.
Okay.
We call it the first system. That means it's a system in the middle between joint assets and separation of assets, because they could, during the marriage, they could buy assets for themselves, but in case of divorce, they have to share these assets and divide them in the divorce process.
Okay.
So it's quite particular in that sense, and unless they have a prenup agreement signed, again, that will mean that they could just buy the asset by themselves.
But what about tax implications for that then? Because I think before you mentioned for the UK about the tax authorities.
Yeah.
Would the same apply to Sweden for that?
Yeah, it's similar. It depends. Of course, we have to check who's providing the funds for the investment, and if it's the money is coming from both of the spouses, and if not, of course, to arrange the necessary documents, not to have any problems with the tax authorities.
Yeah.
Thinking that there is a gift or there is any type of situation arising to a tax.
Yeah, of course. And for the US, what's the sort of how does it work with the US clients?
Yeah, with the US clients, it's very different, because in US we have so many states, and in the different states they can have different matrimonial status, either joint assets or separation of assets.
Okay.
So it's not the whole, for the whole country, it's not the same. So we have to study, of course, where the client is coming from
and
first.
what the rules are. I never knew that. So every state could potentially be different in how they
Could
approach
be
it.
different, exactly.
Wow, okay.
Exactly.
That'll be really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I've got you guys there because, for the US clients, I don't quite understand the rules because things can change, but it's good that you can walk them through that and help.
Of course, we are here for that.
Perfect. So when you're buying a property, what would you be, from your experience, what would you say the common pitfalls and mistakes are that people maybe make and they should try and avoid in the legal process, and why is it really important that they should have a lawyer on board to help through that?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, it's of course very important to have a lawyer on your side to protect your interests and to not to fall into these typical mistakes. Unfortunately, at the office we receive also clients that decided not to use a lawyer to save money on legal fees, and they come to us with a big problem. So it's very important to hire the services of a lawyer from the very beginning, not to fall into these problems. Of course, run away from illegal build. That's unfortunately a problem that we had in some areas of the Costa del Sol. The lack of first occupation license, with exception, of course, we have to, because there are, for example, old buildings that don't have the first occupation license, but because at the time they were constructed, for example, in the beginning of the 80s, the first occupation license was not existing. So so if they don't have the first occupation license, it's not really a big issue. But I mean, construction that was done afterwards and then they were not granted the first occupation license. This is, of course, an area that you have to run away from. Also, non-declared extensions in villas, that's also very important to look at, because you can end up buying a property that has 50 square meters in the land registry, and then there is 300, physically you have 300 meters. And they are not registered anywhere, and you don't even know if they are legalized. So these are things to be careful with.
Right. And how do you help them through that? And why is it important to get a lawyer?
I mean, the most important part of our job, let's say, is to conduct a due diligence, to do the legal searches, just to make sure that the client is not going to have any legal problems in the future. From the very beginning, we check the land registry, the nota simple, to know that the person that is selling the property to us is the real owner, because you can see all sorts, unfortunately, and to know if there is any prohibition to sell the property, any charges, any encumbrances that of course have to be lifted before the client becomes owner. And besides that, we take care of many other things during the process, but that's the most important part, conducting the due diligence process to make sure there's no legal issues with the property.
So we've spoke about what it is people need to do to buy the property from a legal perspective, but what should they do after they buy the property? Is there any considerations there from a legal perspective?
Yes, that's also very important question, because of course after the parties you are owner of your house, you just want to come for holidays to Spain, but of course you need to do also, you need to also do some other things to be always not to have any problems with the authorities. The most important is to present your tax forms every year, because just for the fact of having a property in Spain, even if you don't rent it out, you need to present a tax form, a non-resident tax form, to tell the authorities that you have this property and pay the corresponding tax for it. If you rent out the property, of course you pay according to the income that you receive, but otherwise it's calculated differently, not based on your income, but you need to present it in any case. Other important things to do it's not compulsory, but we always recommend it to our clients because it's not expensive and it is going to save a lot of hassle afterwards. Is the preparation of a Spanish will, a Spanish testament.
Okay.
It's just a matter of going to the notary for 30 minutes, and as I said, it's not expensive. And in my particular case, that I have been dealing with inheritance processes for many international clients with and without the Spanish will. By comparison, it takes longer, it is more expensive, and it's a hassle for the family members to deal with the process. So I will definitely recommend to prepare a Spanish will.
No, it makes sense, and it's a stress during that. If that happened, it's a stress you don't want to deal with. So if you have it prepared up front, it should hopefully be a lot easier for the family.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've covered quite a lot, but just in terms of your final bit of advice that you would give to anyone thinking about buying a property in the Costa del Sol, what would that be?
Well, I will definitely recommend the clients to, or the clients to be. I will definitely recommend them to engage the services of the lawyer before they make the reservation, and even to have their own lawyer to do the reservation for them. In order to advise them also what is the best way to do the investment, if it's as physical persons, with a Spanish company, with a foreign company that they have in their countries. So it's definitely something that we will need to advise them from the very beginning before they make the reservation. So just the definitive tip is to have a lawyer engaged from the very beginning, or even before you have decided what property you want to buy, so you know the expenses that you are going to have during the process, if you are buying an off-plan property, if you are buying a resale property. So just to have a call with your lawyer, and so to know the most important information before you make the investment. Yeah,
I think that's good advice. I mean, I get a lot of questions. Right now, I've got a client asking about buying it in a business, or buying it in a personal name, and they're trying to understand that. And I've recommended maybe we get a call set up with the lawyer to talk through that process, just so they know what they're going to do before we start. We normally also take this call free of charge, just to give them the initial advice, and so they are not lost and they don't know, and to give them also tranquility and for them to be safe with this big step they are taking. So I think it's something that they all should do. Listen, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
We've learned so
much about this process, and hopefully the audience have as well. So thank you. And we'll see you again.
Welcome. Okay.